Hi everyone, my name is James Feeney. Welcome to or back to my channel. Today we are going to be going through my favorites from the month of March along with a few reflections. I'm not sure about all of you, but for me this month felt particularly long, not in a bad way, but it was busier in a lot of ways for me, and I also felt like I had a lot of time to explore the things that I wanted to and use the items that I'm going to be speaking to in just a moment. So I feel really lucky that this month has been what it was, and I'll get more into that as we go. But without further ado, I'll start with the decks that I worked with the most this month, or the ones that were most notable, followed by the books that I read, and then we'll speak to some miscellaneous things and some experiences as well. So we'll start with the most obvious, as I usually do. I like to get the really straightforward repeat offenders off the list right away, and those are going to be no surprise to anybody who's watched my former videos. But we have a Thoth deck, the Trimmed. It will always be on my reading table. It will always be in use, and so it's here. Not too much else to say on that. Along with a deck of playing cards, which is a staple for me in the recent months or so. And this one I've been speaking about most months. It's the one I use the most for my daily draws, for readings, things like that. It's the pagan playing cards from Usi, however you say it. They tend to be my favorite, or at least my go-to, and I keep them in this nice little leather pouch that I got off Etsy. So those two are the most obvious ones who are probably always going to be on the list in some capacity. Next, we'll get into some that might be a little bit more surprising or different from former months. The first being, I guess we'll go with you. We have Jodorowsky's, and I believe it's just Jodorowsky's, but the publisher's, how do you pronounce that? Wow. I've only ever just seen it on paper, never thought to pronounce it. Jodorowsky and Camon, something like that. I believe it's French, but in my Marseille studies and my recent readings, I definitely wanted to have this deck to read Jodorowsky's book on the Marseille, which was a recommendation from Anna from Astral Lady Tarot, and it was a wonderful recommendation. I think it was one of the better books on Marseille that I've read, and it offered so much, and it was quite different in its perspective. I'm going to get to that book in just a second, but this is the deck that accompanies it. And I've heard some people talk about how the colors in this one are rather vibrant, and that's kind of a divisive quality about this deck, I guess, where some people really enjoy that and seek it out, and others would prefer other types or styles of Marseille. I actually really enjoy the bright colors, not all the time, but I do like how there is something that feels a little bit more realistic about these images as opposed to some other Marseilles. So I guess that quality is also something that can be a little bit polarizing as well. Do you want to see more realistic looking people with actual skin tones that might exist as opposed to the stark white of a background or some odd color that another Marseille uses? I have really enjoyed this deck. I think the cardstock is great. It's actually on the thinner side, which I appreciate for riffle shuffling, and I've used this one a bit in client readings actually, as opposed to the other Marseilles that I'm going to mention. This one I felt the most called to use with other people. I feel like it's very relatable and excitable, and it gets somebody really invested in the reading. I guess that's just my personal opinion, but I was drawn to use it in that way. So another one I really enjoyed. Oh, and these are the backs. So next I will pull out a copy of the Dodal from Flo Noir, the one that you can get on, I believe, Tarot History. I'll try to link at least the names of all of these below and links to them where you can purchase them. But it's a rather large tarot. I didn't know when I first got it that it was going to be as big as it is. It's definitely significantly larger than standard tarot size. These are the backs. The cardstock is on the thicker side, but I can riffle shuffle it pretty easily. I, like many others, really enjoyed the expressions and the eyes of the Dodal figures, the characters, and for me it's one that is really great for study. It's quite expressive in a unique way. Something about it feels really fun and playful, and so it's been a really nice one. And it's also, I would say, ideal that the size of it is larger than standard tarot, because I can see all the details, and for learning purposes I found that to be really helpful, so I can point out all the little flourishes on the flowers and the colors and the discrepancies where maybe a line isn't closed properly or something to that effect. So I've really enjoyed this one as well, sometimes pulling it for daily draws and more personal use, I would say. So next, a copy of the Noble. I have the one from Flo Noir, but I've been using this one a lot more. This is the Peterson. You can get it on Etsy. And the reason is really superficial why I've been using this one. Maybe not superficial, but why I've been using this one more than the Flo Noir one. And it is mostly because of the cardstock. The Flo Noir deck, the Noble specifically, has really thick cardstock, and I'm not able to riffle shuffle it really well. I did round the corners thinking maybe that would, I don't know, make it a more friendly deck to me and as far as use, but it didn't. Not well. I enjoy it. I do enjoy it. I find the stark, very clean lines of the Flo Noir to be helpful for study purposes, but for actual use, this one has thinner cardstock, and so I'm able to riffle shuffle it, and it actually shuffles beautifully. And I think the cardstock is perfect. It's not too thick, it's not too thin, and then, like many will know, the Noble is a smaller Mareille, and it's somewhat close to playing card size, a little bit bigger, just a hair bigger, but this one keeps more of the traditional old styling to it, so it's not as clean and stark and polished, but there's also an appeal and draw to that, so I have been enjoying it, mostly because I can shuffle it a lot better than the other one, but yeah, either one I could really go for. And then the final deck I have to share is the Midnight deck by, I don't want to mispronounce their name, Gurgeli Bagamari. I believe the artist is Hungarian. This is a Tarot de Marseille as well. I know Kasha from Tarot Map featured this on her Instagram and did a YouTube video on it as well, where there's a bit of a flip through and her thoughts on it, so definitely go check that out if you're interested in this deck. It has really, really interesting cardstock. It is a more traditional Tarot de Marseille. I would say the biggest changes come in, oh wait, here's the title card. Oh, I love these decks that have like your number put on it. So the first edition, this is 33 of 55. Those decks I think just make you feel a lot more special in having them, so always appreciated. But I love the coloring. The size of it is nice. It is closer to a standard tarot, but the corners are really round, which is odd for a Marseille. But the actual coloration is pretty straightforward and standard, but what's different for the most part is the people. So not just mostly their facial expressions. That's the thing that stands out the most to me. And I know that on Etsy it said that it was a deck meant to be used at the witching hour. And there is something a little bit sinister or coy or cheeky, like they have secrets. A really, really interesting one is the Justice card. I hope this is actually focusing. She's quite interesting. So yeah, they all have just very evocative facial expressions in their eyes and just the way everything is kind of arranged. And then the hair color is more of this corally peachy pink, as opposed to yellows, which we see a lot in some Marseilles, or sometimes we'll see blue hair, which is very common, but for some reason the hair color did stand out to me. But I really have been enjoying it. It feels just fun, and the facial expressions are something that I like to read into. That's something that you'll see in the Dodal as well. I believe that this is more of a Conver reproduction, just based on the name of the Fool, which is in this deck, I believe, Le Mat, as opposed to, is Le Mat. So that would be, I think that makes it a type 2 Tarot de Marseille. I'm definitely not so well versed in what makes one the other or how that is all gone about, but I believe Le Mat is something that occurs in Tarot de Marseille type 2. So that's what makes me think that. But I've really been enjoying it. The cardstock is very interesting. It has like a different coating on the back compared to the front. It riffle shuffles like a dream, and that's part of why I really enjoy it. It comes in this tuck box, and it doesn't actually have those side flip things, which I appreciate because those to me are really annoying, and it works. It does what it needs to do. It closes extremely easily. I'm not too fussy about super thick cardstock. I actually prefer usually thinner cardstock for shuffling purposes, and tuck boxes don't bother me at all. So it was perfect as it is, and it's actually a really inexpensive deck compared to some indie decks, so I like where the efficiency in cost and production kind of merges with the quality of the deck, so I would highly recommend it. That's one you will probably see more of on my channel. I might share my thoughts in more detail in days to come. But that covers all of the decks that I've been using and working with this month. Now we'll move into the books. And this month there are more books than usual. I think I tend to go through 4 books a month on average. I'll usually do like 1 a week. But we have 5 books, and they actually aren't like super small books. So this is what I said or meant when I said that this month felt really long. Usually I wouldn't feel like I had the amount of time to complete this many books, but for some reason this month I did. And so we'll start and go in the order of, I would say, how I read them or when I finished them. So the first one I finished this month was Mareille Tarot, Toward the Art of Reading by Camellia Elias. I know she's quite popular and well known in the tarot world, especially those who like Mareille and playing card readings. So I had to read her book, of course, or at least this one. I have her other book. I think it's something like Read Like the Devil. I forget the exact name, but that's going to be read. I'm going to read it in April. But I really enjoyed this. It's a bit of a quicker read compared to some others, but I really enjoyed it for that fact. It is quite conversational and approachable. I definitely now understand what people say when they favor her approach and her writing style. It's something that's easy to read as opposed to some other tarot books, which can be a little bit dense and textbook-like and sometimes overly scholarly in some ways that just is a bit dry. And this is definitely, her writing style is not dry. It's always active. It's always engaging the reader, and it's relatable in a lot of ways. There's something about it that's empowering and down to earth, but also very practical at the same time. And then there are a lot of images and examples. So a lot of this is constituted of actual readings that have taken place and the results of those readings, along with her own thoughts on the tarot, but in a way that feels like you're being spoken to, not spoken, or spoken with, not spoken at. So it's not this sort of lecture-like quality. It definitely has more of a conversational tone. Really enjoyed it, so highly recommend for anybody out there studying the Mareille, although the deck that she uses for her example isn't one that I think is super readily available or as well known, but the details are similar enough to where it could really go for any Mareille deck. The next one I finished was The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, who was also the author of The Starless Sea. I mentioned this book in my recent video where I made a spread that I loosely based actually on this book, so if you want to check that out, I'll link it above. But I really, really enjoyed this book. Just like I did The Starless Sea, I actually am having trouble deciding which one I liked more. I think I enjoyed them equally, but for different reasons, and they are very different in their style, or at least the tone quality to them, if that makes sense. I forget who it was, but somebody commented on one of my videos and said that The Starless Sea was a little bit more of like an intellectual read, whereas this was more of a feeling and intuitive read. I wish I could remember who commented something to that effect, but I very much agree. This was more of an experience where you felt like you were inside of it. There was a lot more emotion packed into this. It does have a big element of romance. The Starless Sea had some romance in it, but I don't feel like that was the prominent aspect or the driving factor behind the story or the narrative, whereas it really was in this one, it seemed to be. I don't want to give too much away, but there's a lot of fantastical magic going on. Of course, the actual Night Circus is within this book. There is a circus element where a lot of the story takes place. We have the main female protagonist and the male protagonist, and of course there's this sort of star-crossed lovers aspect that enters the fray. And usually I'm not one for overt romances. I tend to find them a little bit cliched and corny, and it can get just sort of, I would say, it feels like it's been overdone. It can really get sort of sappy in a way that detracts from the quality of the writing, but this didn't do that at all. It was very complex, and it did feel like there was still a lot of, I would say, identity to each of the characters outside of the romance, which I appreciate. And I am really glad that Erin Morgenstern did a lot of research in regards to the metaphysical type subjects that she includes in here. Tarot specifically, there are a lot of tarot readings. There is a character who is a reader in this book, and they use a Mareille deck, which is very historically accurate of the time and where the character's from. They're just the way everything is done. Some cards are revealed and we actually get to see some insights into the readings. And to me, it's very indicative of somebody who actually knows what the cards might mean and how to read them, as opposed to somebody who just wanted to include tarot in their novels. So I appreciate that a lot. So anybody out there who is a witch, who likes metaphysical type things, who enjoys tarot, will find these within the book, and they're kind of interspersed with the narrative quality. I also like how Erin Morgenstern switches up the perspectives in her books. I think that that's something that needs to be handled very delicately. It can either really enhance a book or completely detract from it, in my opinion. If it feels scattered and we don't have enough time to really get to know or invest in any of the characters, then it just feels like you're reading something very surface level. But when you actually see really core bits of them and there's an even sort of disbursement between time allocated for each of the protagonists, you can start to feel this sort of conflicting sense, especially when they're pitted against each other in some way and you don't know which side you're rooting for because you are exposed to both equally and they both are characters that are kind of tugging at your heartstrings in some ways. So I love that. And this is not exactly a short read. I think to properly handle multiple perspectives, it does require a longer book. It has really thin pages, just like the Starless Sea did. I like to think of them like Bible pages, because Bibles have really thin pages. So it is a little bit over 500 pages. So there is time for Erin Morgenstern to really flesh out all of the characters, which I appreciated. Highly recommend this novel for anybody who seems like they might be interested in this. So the next one I finished was actually another novel. This is The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichek. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Looks like this. I wasn't planning on reading this one this month. It kind of just fell into my lap, and I'm very happy that it did. It is essentially based around Norse mythology and the idea of... Now, others who know Norse mythology a lot better than me will know a lot of these names and be able to pronounce them better than I can, but the main character is Angerboda, and she is a witch, and I know she's mentioned in the... Oh my gosh, what is that one book that is basically the basis for all of Norse mythology as we know it? I think somebody out there will know it. It's the Poetic Edda, I believe. And so she's in the Poetic Edda, so there are creative liberties taken. The author, Genevieve Gornichek, actually has a degree from Ohio State University majoring in Vikings and Norse myths. So her education is actually completely on par for what this book is, so it made me feel like she did the research, she knew what she was talking about. I'm someone who likes to read about the author and the acknowledgements and all of that, so I do like to see where the author is coming from in some ways, and also who contributed to the book, which is what you'll generally find in the acknowledgements. So if you're looking for those people who maybe proofread or edited or offered their input, you'll find that all in the acknowledgements. But it follows Angerboda, and she has quite a tough life, and it kind of goes through the actual myths, but through her perspective all the way up until Ragnarok, and it's very interesting. I would say I enjoyed the Night Circus a little bit more, but for the mythological aspects, I enjoyed this quite a bit, just seeing more sides and nuance and depth to all of these gods, goddesses, giants, etc. The perspective makes it interesting, because in this book, Odin and the gods are almost like the enemies, and the giants are kind of the good guys, and Angerboda is a giant, pretty much. So it's interesting to see how it all plays out. I would say that this one has a lot more telling rather than showing. The Night Circus had this sort of rich language that made you feel like you were within the story, experiencing it. It led you along. It was fluid. This was a lot of just telling you exactly in an expository sort of way what's going on. This happened, then this happened, so I did this. As opposed to the Night Circus, where you might actually have to pick up on the context clues and feel like you're filling it in for yourself. This really felt like it was being handed to you. I didn't mind that as much, but it does create a more simplistic style of writing that can become a little bit dry. Not dry, but it has this sort of abrupt quality. Nonetheless, I really enjoyed it. If anybody out there is interested in Norse mythology and wants a more novel-style way of viewing it all, highly, highly recommend this. So the next one I finished was The Flowers of Evil by Charles Baudelaire. This is a book of poetry. I believe I just featured this in my recent video where I used this book of poetry and went through a few of the poems, created a sort of story with tarot cards based on the poems. So if you're interested in that, I will link it around. I really enjoyed this. I wanted to get back into reading some poetry, and this just seemed like a natural fit, especially alongside my Marseille studies. It is a little bit more saucy and feisty and naughty in some ways. I mentioned a bit of the history in the video where I mentioned this more heavily, but it is very interesting. I would say elements of sex and death and the human body and condition are very prevalent in here, and there's something about it that feels very humanizing in some ways, but also cosmic in others. So I know it's broken into sections. We have sections, I think one is called Wine, one is called Paris, and so there is a sort of theme going on, and some of the poems to me are written in a way that's very close to prose, and then others are most definitely not. So yeah, we have Parisian scenes as one section. I believe one section might be called Death. It's very, very interesting, to say the least. So I would recommend this to anybody who is maybe looking for poetry that's excitable and just different off the beaten path. We have the Flowers of Evil by Charles Baudelaire. And then the final one I recently just finished, is The Way of Tarot, The Spiritual Teacher in the Cards by Alejandro Jodorowsky and Marianne Costa. Like I said before, this was a recommendation to me from Anna at Astrolady Tarot, so thank you, Anna. I enjoyed this thoroughly. It's a little bit of a thicker book. I would say it looks thicker than it is. So this is a little over 500 pages, but then again, so was Night Circus. And this one, honestly, I feel like took longer to read or had more in it. So it might just be the fact that, for example, you get a lot of pages where you'll get an image. Okay, that's a whole page taken up. You get half the page taken by the title. I think a lot of these larger books look intimidating until you start reading them. And especially with tarot-related books, you get so much imagery and pictures put in that sometimes you'll go through like 10 pages and you really read maybe 1 page's worth of writing, because you'll see like a diagram or cards being laid out, and so suddenly the formatting just creates a lot of space taken up by not a lot of words. I would say this isn't a quick read by any means, but don't be so intimidated by the size. I think after I read Holistic Tarot and that big Robert M. Place book, along with the Spirit Keepers Tarot big book, I feel a lot less intimidated by these larger tarot books now, and so this one didn't seem like too much, but I would say it has a lot packed into it that's really useful. It feels like Jodorowsky's approach, as he defines himself, a tarotologist, which is also how I believe Camelia Elias roughly, in some regards, defines herself, along with Enrique Enriquez. His approach actually, to me, seemed a little bit different from both of theirs. If I had to say, or pick one approach that I favored, I would hesitantly say somewhere between Camelia Elias's and Jodorowsky's. I think they have a lot of merit. I liked Enrique Enriquez's and reading his book, watching his documentary, but I think his style's farther on one side of the spectrum than I ever tend to drift myself. For the most part, I'm more in the gray zones, and it seems like Camelia Elias and Jodorowsky fit within that realm a little bit more. I think they're still both on one side of the spectrum that's close to Enrique Enriquez's, but I could chart this all out, actually. I could make this whole spectrum and try to put different writings and authors on it. But anyway, digressing, this was a really good book. It goes through all of the cards, how to read them. I think his approach it makes a lot of sense. It's very much, in a way, his own system, the idea of viewing the numbers specifically correlating to human experience from, I would say, 2 points, the Fool and the World, and then everything happening in between, how the one is reflected in what would be, its counterpart. There's this really cool way of going about it. Also the way of viewing the landscapes and the cards and numbers throughout the suit in terms of like 5s to 6s being a sort of bridge. Very, very interesting, something I hadn't seen any other author go about in such a way. So Jodorowsky's system alone, I think, is reason enough to read this book. But if you are looking to learn the Mareille, I also think that there's a lot in here, even if you don't care for his system, that would benefit you to read. I know for all of the majors, there were bits where it was spoken about as if the majors could talk to you, what they would say, which I actually really enjoyed. It was quite poetic and fun. And then going through the cards is more interesting. So there is a bit of a section pretty much on each of the individual cards, but then sometimes you'll get them through the suit number correspondence or the number, so they can have separate sections, but it's told in a way that feels very interesting and engaging as opposed to dry and just matter-of-factly. So I did enjoy it for that fact as well. So that takes us through all of the books that I read this month. I would recommend all of them highly. Now we'll get into the more miscellaneous stuff. So I guess I'll start with these. These are just tarot cases or bags that I found on Etsy that I'm really enjoying. Oop. As I'm dropping everything. This black one actually is what I've been housing the Jodorowsky Tarot de Marseille in. It's perfect for more of like a standard size tarot, and it has the sort of wrap quality. I'll try to link this, remember to link this creator below. I forget the name of their Etsy shop. They do tarot cases and bags. They make journals and some necklaces and other sorts of things and notebooks. So yeah, I've really enjoyed it. Wraps up like that. And then I have a brown one as well that has more of a, I believe it's an elk or a deer on this button here. And I haven't given any sort of deck to this bag yet, or this bag to a deck. So we will see. With decks, with bags like these, I kind of like to find a special deck that has more of a meaningful relationship with me. And yeah, as opposed to my other decks, which I bulk order on Amazon, and I just put decks that need spaces in them. Decks and bags, I've been interchanging those words. I'm not even sure if I made sense. Now, moving on to the last few bits and bobs. I guess you could say I went a little bit crazy with the crystals this month. Usually I don't buy any crystals. I'm pretty content with my collection and use them all in ways that feel right for me. But when you read in a crystal shop, it's sometimes hard to stay away from them. They're constantly in my line of sight when I'm working. So I did actually go for a few that I'm enjoying. The first is this crescent lapis lazuli. And I just thought that the way it looked like a night sky, if I can get it to focus, the way it kind of looks like a night sky with the bits of gold, it almost reminds me of like an ocean. It reminds me of the Starless Sea, actually, in a lot of ways. I can almost imagine this being like in the book. I don't know why, but I'm really enjoying it. It's really pretty. And then on top of that, for some reason, I felt very drawn to this type of crystal. So I have two different examples. We have spirit quartz. One is a lot more like white and milky, and it looks more like snow. If I can show it properly. And this one reminds me a little bit more of ice. It's more of a translucent color. I'm not sure how well it's picking up on camera, but I found them really beautiful, more as just pieces for my altar. I had no idea what specifically spirit quartz corresponded to or what it was about, but I do know that I felt very drawn to it, so I went for them. And then upon some research, seeing that it relates to the higher self, or the bridge between the lower and higher self, and connection to those sorts of things, it does make a lot of sense for me where I'm at in life. And if I were to pick a crystal based on correspondence, that's the type I would probably pick for myself right now. So I guess it was maybe some sort of like unconscious drawing to these in some way. But that takes me through the sort of miscellaneous things. Now we'll move into the experiences I had this month, which were really wonderful. You may have noticed that I uploaded a little bit less this month. I tend to usually do 2 videos a week, but I believe for 2 of the weeks of March, I only did 1, if I'm not mistaken. I would have to go back and check that. But I was a bit busier. I had a really fun workshop that I prepared for and ran. It was an intuitive tarot and wine workshop, so it was like a BYOB, and really about getting in touch with your intuition. So less about learning to read the specific cards and their traditional meanings, more about looking at any imagery and life around us to engage our intuition and make decisions from, I would say, a more instinctual place of inner knowing, as opposed to looking for external validation for the decisions we make. And so it was really fun. We incorporated colors, numbers, chakras along with tarot cards, and I had a blast working on that and hosting that at the studio, and then just client readings overall, and also now moving into offering private lessons when I'm not actually offering a beginner class. So all of that has been really exciting for me to kind of branch out in these ways, on these avenues. So I would say those are big primary experiences for me that would be pertinent to a sort of tarot and spiritual related favorites video. Aside from that, I'm trying to think. Not too much. I've been trying to take a lot more time for myself to get some space and perspective, and that's been really great for myself as well. You'll have seen in my recent vlog video where I just kind of took the day trying to have more experiences for myself like that are just wholesome and enjoyable and just for me, for no other reason than that. So that about sums all of that up. I hope you are all well. Let me know what you have been enjoying and what you were up to in the month of March. I'm curious. Like and subscribe if this was fun and interesting. And until next time, bye.